Hello, today we're going to be starting our final assignment of the semester, the information graphic. So we're going to start with this presentation about information graphics and concise arguments. Now, in the previous assignment, you were able to make an argument through a long essay filled with reasoning, all your evidence, your paragraphs upon paragraphs, using those really good quotations and paraphrases, and all that's great. But in life, a lot of times an argument has to be a lot more concise than that. For instance, if you're lobbying somebody or pitching a product or idea, a lot of times you have a very short window to try to get your point across, to try to get them to believe in what you have to offer. So with that in mind, one D2L discussion question that's up on D2L right now is going to ask you to boil your argument essay down to a tweet. So I want you to imagine you want to spread your message virally. You want it to spread all across the internet. But you only have 140 characters or individual letters, numbers, or symbols to do that. Okay, and keep in mind, this is not just your thesis. That by itself doesn't convince anyone. Okay, but I want you to think about what's one specific fact, one specific compelling reason that could get your reader to see that, pass it along, and have an impact. Okay, so leave this presentation, pause it right here, complete that discussion question, and then return. Okay, I'm going to assume that you have done that and come back. Now, I want you to think about how difficult was that compared to the argument essay. Ask yourself that. On one hand, it's very short, so it's a lot easier to write in some regards than a 4-page researched essay. But in terms of actually making the argument, sometimes it can be a little trickier because you're so limited and you have to really make every word count. You really have to make that information, the compelling logic that you had, still compelling in such a short amount of space, right? So while there is a time and place for that extended academic writing that we've been doing all semester, clearly there's a time and place for that in other college courses and also in other types of writing. There's also a need to be concise and direct at times. It's that whole purpose and audience consideration we've been talking about since the beginning of the semester, right? Depending on what you're trying to accomplish and with who, you're not going to be writing an essay at all times. You might be doing something much more direct than that, but still having an argumentative purpose. So if you're trying to change opinions on a large scale, for a general audience, brevity and catchiness is of utmost importance. So brevity meaning it's short, it's brief. Catchiness meaning it can go viral, it can catch on, right? That's what that word means. It can, for whatever reason, be very meaningful to people. They pick up on it, they don't forget it. Okay? And one great way to do that is through visual arguments. Okay, so we've talked about shortening our language with something like a tweet, but if you have an image with it, sometimes that can carry a lot of meaning, that old cliche, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So let's look at some visual arguments that other people have come up with, specifically advertisements. Okay, advertisements are meant to get you to do something, to buy something, to believe something, right? So they're a great thing to analyze for our discussion here. And in each of these advertisements, I want you to identify the argument being made and also how the visuals add to it. So the first one, classic poster from decades past, an old guy pointing at you saying, I want you for the U.S. Army, nearest recruiting station. So what's the argument? Okay, well, it's clear that it wants you, the person reading this, to join the Army, so that's pretty clear. Right, this is a wartime tool to get people to enlist. But what about the image? This is a pretty simple ad, but it's very effective. Why do you think that is? Well, if you said something about, well, the guy is Uncle Sam, right? This person who represents America, right? He's a symbol. He's got red, white, and blue in his clothes, right? His hat looks like the American flag in some regards, right? It's really invoking your patriotism by having this person pointing at us. Now, that's not the guy at the recruiting station, of course, right? That's going to be somebody in the military who's got that duty, but it creates this image in our mind. It's a simple picture, but it carries a lot of meaning. Let's look at something a little bit different. Okay? In this ad, what do you think they're going for? Yes, it's right there. Drink Coca-Cola in bottles, right? But why is this guy trying to sell it to us? You know, why Santa? Well, a lot of times people say, well, you know, Santa has a positive atmosphere associated with him, right? We think of Christmas, happy times, so associating that with Coke is a really good marketing tool. And that's right. Now, what's interesting is look at how he's dressed in red, Coca-Cola, their marketing is also red. Do you think that's a coincidence? Well, which came first, Coca-Cola or Santa? Well, if you said Santa came first, well, not really, at least not this incarnation of him. In fact, the Coca-Cola company, back about 100 years ago, even a little bit more, invented this image of Santa. Before that, he was represented as more of a hunter, wearing green and browns, but now we think of him as red, right? Because the Coca-Cola advertisers drew him in red for their ad and just stuck, right? So this is a great example of how those visual images can carry a lot of meaning. Okay, now these are all simple advertisements trying to get you to buy a soda or join the army, right? But you can make a complex argument with visuals as well, with research, okay? And this is where that information graphic comes in, okay? This is a sample information graphic, and this is from a previous student who's taken 101. And you can see a couple of things going on here, okay? First, up here, we have a pie chart, okay, saying pregnancies carried on or terminated after a Down syndrome diagnosis. And the research shows, and down here we have where this research is from, but the research shows that when an expectant mother gets a Down syndrome diagnosis for her unborn child, 90% terminate the pregnancy, get an abortion. Only 10% carry on the pregnancy, okay? So that's a fact from the research, okay? That in and of itself doesn't make an argument. But what's interesting is once you combine it with this, right, we have synthesis. We have here, as we move to the right of the bar graph, to the prenatal testings, or the tests done before the baby's born, get more dangerous. They can harm the baby, causing deformation, or can cause the mother to have a miscarriage, okay? So she's found statistics on 4 different tests that can give you a Down syndrome diagnosis. Blood testing, so that's just taking blood from the mother's arm. An ultrasound, which is using sound waves to get an image of the child. Amniocentesis, which is when they take a big needle and stick it into the amniotic sac around the child. And then chorionic villus testing, which is something similarly invasive. But as you can see, the student who wrote this says that as we go right, things get more dangerous. And as you can imagine, blood testing isn't going to harm the child. Ultrasound typically doesn't cause any damage either. But these other two can cause deformation or lead to a higher rate of miscarriage. Not every time, but they get more dangerous. But you can also see that's the only way to get the accuracy as well. Because if all you're doing is a blood test, that's less than 60% accurate. Okay? And when you think about the fact that 90% are terminating, you probably want to be very sure about what you're diagnosing. But as you can see, if you get closer to 100%, as her graph very well shows, then all of a sudden you're taking a chance of harming the baby. So you might be getting this more accurate result, but you may be hurting the baby to get it, right? So as you can guess, her thesis had to do with the fact that she thought, and this is not a general point about abortion, keep in mind, okay? She had a much more nuanced argument. Her argument was that mothers should not get an abortion, should not terminate a pregnancy based on a Down syndrome diagnosis. Part of the reason was that they're just not accurate, right? A lot of the times, as we can see over here. Or if they are, if you're trying to get more accurate to make that decision, you're actually putting your baby at risk. So her point was that should not be the basis because it's just too unreliable, causes too many issues. And as you can see, that is a pretty complex argument, but she uses a lot of visuals and not a lot of language to make that point. That's what we're talking about with an information graphic. Okay, so what I want you to do now is go over and read the assignment sheet for the information graphic, okay, and then return here after you've done so to give yourself a good sense of what this essay, or what this final assignment, it's not really an essay, is all about. Okay, so if you have any questions about the information graphic, obviously you're going to want to email me, ask me, or put general questions on D2L. But we also have some samples. On the website, it gave some, or I'm sorry, in the assignment sheet, it gave you a website for Pinterest. Okay, I have a username that gives some sample information graphics that you can check out. Sometimes seeing samples are really helpful, right? Now you're not going to just copy one that you find, of course. You're going to create your own, and another slideshow or another show will teach you how to do that. But just look at some of these ways that people created visual content to represent data, right? For instance, we have ones that are something like this: everyone who's ever lived and died on Earth versus people who are alive today. I find this one fascinating, right? We have 7 billion people alive on Earth right now. Well, there's only been 108 billion who've ever lived, according to estimates of human beings, right? So when you think about it, this is everyone alive right now, and this is everyone that's ever been alive, including all the dead people, right? That really makes you think about how many people are currently alive, right? That's a pretty big chunk. That's about 1 in 15 people who have ever lived are currently alive, right? I know that's fascinating for me. And there's various other ones on here that are really interesting, but there's a few from former students that I want to draw your attention to, okay? They're pretty interesting, okay? There's some professional ones here as well. One is right here. The student was talking about climate change, and he created these graphs to show that a small increase in carbon dioxide can lead to a large increase in temperature. And he has one graph showing that from 1960 to 2013, the carbon dioxide in parts per million didn't grow that much, just a little bit of additional carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But as this other graph shows, from 1960 to 2013, we went from about a -degree change in temperature, so things got slightly colder, to now, in this year, we're getting a 3% increase in degrees Fahrenheit. And as he's showing the graph growing so rapidly, it's showing that even this little increase has a major impact on the temperature, really trying to show that climate change is a serious issue. That's what his argument was all about. And another really good one that I'll show you: where's the paycheck from the United States government? Women in the Untied, she spelled this wrong, so this is a great example to show you why you should proofread carefully, because it can really kill a otherwise great infographic. She shows maternity leave. So that's when, government paid leave. So the government pays people who just had a child this many weeks away from work to start raising the child. In Canada, 50 weeks, almost a full year, okay, paid by the government. France, a little bit under 20. Australia, about 18, or no, a little bit, so about 12, a little under 15. Spain is at 15. The United States is a flat square. That's because it's a grand total of 0. So the government does not pay for any maternity leave in this country. And when you just look at that by itself, you might say, well, who would do such a thing? As you can see, these other countries do have that. So her clear point is that the United States should also do that. But notice it's representing it visually. That's what it's all about with an infographic, okay? So there's other samples for you to check out. So please do so as you wish, because this can give you really good ideas of what to do, okay? And then finally, once you start working on this infographic, you need to download your argument essay and start brainstorming. What information do you want to include in your infographic? It should be something factual, so look to your research. Okay, and you can also look at research that you didn't include in your essay, maybe other things from those same sources. But it should also be very influential. Okay, and think about how can you possibly represent that in your research. Okay, that's what we're looking for in an infographic. So as you go through the other videos, other presentations, just really think about how can you make a visual point to still represent your argument as strongly as possible.